Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could take virtually everything that's ever happened in education that relates to students' achievement and put them along this continuum? So we can identify what are the things that are up here that really enhance achievement, what are the things that have some effect on achievement, and of course, identify the things that have a negative effect on achievement. And what I've been doing for the last 50-odd years is literally taking thousands of studies and converting them into a common metric so I can put them along the scale. For example, if I ask the question, what's the typical effect on achievement of reducing class size? Typically from 30 down to 15. Now let me comment that this morning my attention is entirely about achievement. And I'm acknowledging right at the front there are many other important attributes of schooling. I've done a similar kind of analysis with the affective domain. The details are different, the messages are the same, and as you could probably imagine, there are lots of gaps in the affective domain. I tried to do the physical domain, but I gave up because there's just too few studies. And of course there are other attributes of schooling. So my attention is entirely achievement. So what do you think? If you could take, there's about 100-odd studies that have looked at class size, about 1 million kids that I have in the database that have looked at going from classes of about 30 to 15. Do you think the effect is dramatic? Do you think it's going to be on average? Anyone think it's zero? No effect at all? Well, when I churn them around and put them all on the same scale, I get an average effect of about 0.20. Now, for those of you who don't like numbers, you're going to discover that the relativity, where they fall on the scale, is more important. Those of you who do love numbers, this is an effect size, standard deviation unit. And of course, the details are important. The moderators are important. I'll come back to some of those, but that's not my major message this morning. But when you look at a 0.2 effect, it's kind of like reducing achievement by on average about 9 months. So it's not surprising that every teacher, every parent, and every politician I've ever met says, we've got to reduce class size. Now, if the effect was 1, you can see a very dramatic effect. So there's not going to be many things in education up here. So I'm trying to give you a sense of the scale. But go back to the 0.0. The common argument is therefore that we must reduce class sizes because that effect of 0.20 is worth it. My first point to you this morning is that's the stupidest, craziest, inanest, puerile thing we do in education, and it's destroying our business. Because we're making a false comparison. We're comparing to the 0 point, smaller versus large classes. What we should be doing is we should be saying, what's the effect of reducing class sizes compared to all the other things we do? From the school, the home, the child, the teachers, the strategies, the curriculum, you name it. What's the typical effect? And the way I estimate that effect is I've synthesized about 800 meta-analyses, about 50,000 studies, and around 240 million kids. Now, you name it, I've got it almost. And I've certainly looked, as you can imagine, right across. One of the things that's fascinating is that, contrary to popular opinion, there are not many moderators in this business. What I'm going to talk to you about this morning applies to maths as it applies to English. It applies to young kids as it applies to older kids. I've tended to put my limit of my interest between 4 and 20. So adult education is maybe a different story. I don't know. There are some. And of course you must look for them. So what's the average effect? Well, the average effect, if we compare everything, is 0.40. So you can see now that class size is just not there. Relative to the average effect, it's not good enough. And quite frankly, I wouldn't spend many pennies on it at all. Now, it's really important to remember that I am summarizing past literature. I am summarizing what has happened. When teachers have gone from classes to 30 to 20, it hasn't made much difference. Has not. It could, but it hasn't. Here's 250 million kids. The first thing I want you to note is the 0 point. There. If you look at these negative things, there's not many things we do in education that decrease kids' achievement. And some of these actually make sense. The presence of one disruptive kid in a class negates the performance of most kids. And so when you take those kind of negative ones you'd expect to be negative out, about 95 to 97% of things that we do to kids to enhance their achievement work. All you need to enhance children's achievement is a pulse. And anybody that comes to me and says, I can show you that I'm enhancing a kid's achievement. When a teacher says, look at the evidence, I can enhance a kid's achievement, quite frankly, I don't want that teacher anywhere near me. Because everybody can. And my frustration in our business is we have used that 0 point so often that we have got a profession where everything goes. Where every teacher is left alone to do what they choose to do and how they choose to do it. Because we say, as long as you can show me we enhance achievement, then I'll leave you alone. There's your point 4 mark. It's a coincidence, but not a surprise, that there's a lovely normal distribution. About half of our teachers out there now, these are real teachers now, this is not a fictitious point, the 4-0, it's not an ideal point, it's an average point. Half the teachers out there now are having effects on kids above my average point. I do not want my child in one of these classrooms where the teacher can sit there and say, I'm enhancing your achievement, but is doing it below average. What my fundamental interest is what are the attributes of these compared to the attributes of these? How do we make that distinction? How can I make a story? When I first wrote my first book on this, I got to 500 pages, and I looked at it, and it was full of statistics and effect sizes and moderators, and I had HLNs, you name it. It was just power-packed with numbers, and it was so boring and so tedious, I threw it away. And I wrote a brand new one concentrating on the story, and that's what I want to have with you this morning. Now, before I get to the story, I've got obviously some evidence I want to produce to you. So what I'm trying to do at the beginning here is to set the scene. I've got a continuum of achievement. I've got a measure, how I can convert literally thousands of studies onto the same metric. I've got an average point of 0.4, which is what I'm going to argue is my benchmark. I certainly don't want 0. Just as a little aside, one of the things that intrigued me from the work I've been doing in places like Liberia, Nepal, Guatemala, and places like that, is that in those countries, many kids don't go to school. But if you look at 5-year-olds in Nepal and you look at 15-year-olds, they clearly improve. So what's the effect of development, maturation? Now, my best effect of that, from all the literature I can find on that, is it's about 0.15. So I'm setting that as kind of my limit, my benchmark. Anything 0.15, less than 0.15 to me, is being destructive. And you're going to see there's quite a few things we do that are less than 0.15 that, quite frankly, hold kids backwards. A test. You always give a test if you think if there's hardly any questions from the audience. So I'll give you an assessment at this stage. What I'd like you to do for a couple of moments here is just identify what you think are the top 1 or 2 in terms of their overall effect, and the bottom 1 or 2 from that list. Talk to your neighbour. The reason is more important than the ranking. Just the top 1 or 2 and the bottom 1 or 2.